It's a law of the internet that I've seen play out over and over in all the time I've been here. The games, game consoles, and gaming trends that are drenched in the purest, most concentrated, most obnoxious, and most inspiring nostalgic reverence are always whichever ones were most popular with kids about 15 to 20 years ago. And as a correlation, there will always be a small but very passionate contingent of old men in their early 20s whinging on about how gaming lost its way in the past dozen years. Oh, nowadays it's so soulless and corporate. New games just don't have that same spark, but back in my day, Sonny, that was when games were still games! I'm not throwing shade, I've been guilty of it too. We all get a little cranky sometimes. But 20 years ago, I was a kid on the other side of all that. The spotlight of internet nostalgia shone only for the 1980s, and the entire expanse of gaming culture, and the lens through which it viewed and judged the games of the day, was absolutely inundated by pure, unadulterated, unconditional love for the Nintendo Entertainment System. Let me give you an example of how this came across to me as someone who didn't play the NES in its heyday. I'd read a review that said, and I quote, "Sure, there are other racing games out there today, hundreds of them. This one may not necessarily be better than the recent stuff, but it's unique, addictive, and demonstrates what gaming is really about. It is the original that remains loyal to the designs and aspirations of Miyamoto-san from over 2 decades ago." That was gaming discourse in the 2000s. So-called real gamers didn't care about junk like story, characters, or especially graphics. Gameplay was literally the only thing that mattered. Well, as long as the graphics didn't look like this anyway. And Shigeru Miyamoto was on the highest pedestal imaginable, credited with every good thing Nintendo had ever touched, credited with single-handedly saving the video game industry. Even professional critics invoked his name with the whispered reverence of a god. So I would read something like this, and I'd get hyped to experience something that was so unlike what the internet told me was the soulless corporate modern junk the industry was pumping out in the early 2000s. So, I bought an NES at a garage sale for $20, bought the game that review was talking about for a mere $5 at the GameStop in the mall, and sat down to experience it. Let's play it. Let's see it. The true essence of what video games are supposed to be! Is this all there is? This seemed to happen to me over and over and over again. Get hyped about an NES classic I'd never heard of being like the best game of all time, play it for myself, and turn the console off just a few minutes later feeling very confused. This didn't happen every time. Mario games, of course, were always timeless, and a lot of later releases for the console were built to the standard of what I considered 16-bit design principles. But when I was a kid, it was really hard to get hooked into a series by a game that was this kinetic, or by a world that was this compelling. And then to go back to a past that predated me. Older games were invariably slower, simpler, and so much more frustrating. I tried, I wanted to get it, but I just didn't usually see the appeal. That is, until I played Animal Crossing. Maybe I'm guilty of doing that same old everything was better 20 years ago thing I was accusing the NES kids of doing, but later games never quite hit the same way as the original Animal Crossing. A big part of this, I'm sure, is down to the novelty of it. The concept of a game that matches the clock of the real world, that continues to progress when you're not even playing it, was still incredibly fresh in 2002. That same trick was never gonna hit as hard a second time. But there is more to it than that. The first Animal Crossing might have had less to see and do than our modern entries, but the writing was sharper, the jokes hit harder, and your mean-spirited villagers weren't just dull butter knives, they were full-blown assholes. Oh, these modern Animal Crossing games are so soulless and corporate, but Sonny, games were still games back when your animals hurled verbal abuse at you! I have no idea what that accent is even supposed to be. But really, I should say, what the newer Animal Crossing games might lack in snark, they make up for in activities. I've enjoyed most of the latter-day sequels, especially New Leaf. I'm just saying, they haven't made nearly the impact in my memory as that first game. And really, how could they? They were missing the best part! Animal Crossing came with a very special bonus feature. 19 exceedingly rare, highly collectible NES classics were hidden behind a litany of in-game giveaways, mail-order prizes, real-world e-reader cards, and limited-time codes that you could only get on Nintendo.com. And these weren't just pieces of a game or limited-time demos the way Smash Bros. Would do it later. These were the complete games, fully playable within Animal Crossing. When my loan debts were paid, long after the novelty of the real-time clock had worn away, and everything else about Animal Crossing had ceased to be interesting, these kept me coming back. And somehow, someway, these games got their hooks in me so much deeper in this context. Partly it was just a matter of expectations. When Excitebike was built up for me as one of the most revolutionary games ever made, it could never live up to the heights of someone else's childhood memories. But when Excitebike was presented as a cool little curio I earned within Animal Crossing, a free piece of Nintendo's history that I could pick up and enjoy my own way, it finally made sense. A lot of the early NES library functions really well as pick-up-and-play games, the sort of thing you might bust out for a few rounds at lunch, right? And here's one of the coolest things about this already extremely cool thing. You could actually do that. Using one of those link cables that Nintendo kept pushing because they were still a few years away from realizing the internet wasn't just a fad, you could transfer most of the NES games to a Game Boy Advance. I remember seeing Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 2 at the theater, right after playing through Super Mario Bros. During the previews. So yeah, I was into it. By this point in my life, games had already graduated from being a mere hobby. I was invested and interested and curious about the history of this medium. And that's how most of the NES games within Animal Crossing hit me. Products of their time, sure, but no less valuable in their significance. But while I'd heard of most of them, and played a few of them before, some hit me harder than others. Animal Crossing was where I first played Punch-Out! And given what I knew of the NES's hardware, its technical wizardry blew me away even then. It might look like a boxing game, but it's really extremely hard to describe. It's like a execution-focused rhythm puzzle game. I'd never played anything else like it, and I wasn't expecting it to be so precise, so challenging, such a blast to play, even if that precision makes it damn near impossible on our laggy modern displays. Sad to say, I've still never gotten past Mr. Sandman. Those 80s kids were hardcore. Animal Crossing was where I first played Balloon Fight, one of the first games programmed by the late, brilliant Satoru Iwata. This was one of those times where I didn't need to make excuses for the time period. The game clicked as easily in 2003 as I imagine it would have in 1985. I've always been a big proponent of couch co-op, and my bro Kalen and I used to start up Animal Crossing just to start up Balloon Fight, just so we could play it together. For all intents and purposes, this was the NES to me. Animal Crossing was where I first got anywhere at all in The Legend of Zelda. It was where I discovered where those snow kids in Melee came from. It was where I finished Super Mario Bros. For the very first time. It was where I finally came to understand the importance, the reverence, the legacy of the Nintendo Entertainment System, not through the lens of someone else's nostalgia, but on my own terms. It was fundamental to my growth as someone who studies this medium and loves this art form. But it never would have happened if Nintendo hadn't been willing to present them this way, to essentially give me the opportunity to experience them for free within a game that I wanted anyway. And this was right in the middle of a brief period in gaming history where publishers seemed willing to give away their classic games as a bonus. My first experience with so many games from before my time, games that I wouldn't have gone out of my way to experience otherwise, was because of things like this. Alas, it was too good to last. Remember how cool it was that the NES library could transfer to the GBA? Well, by the time Animal Crossing Wild World released 3 years later, Nintendo hadn't just realized what a goldmine NES nostalgia could be, they had cashed in to great financial success and critical aplomb. So Wild World would include no classic games whatsoever, and neither would any future Animal Crossing. The classic NES line, released for the Game Boy Advance in 2004, was a turning point. I saw people who hadn't played games in years getting hooked all over again by the prospect of reliving their childhood. So why would Nintendo want to give me Zelda for free when they could sell it to them for $20? It's a practice that continues to this day. Retro gaming has proven its worth. Nintendo, and most other developers, aren't in the business of giving you their classic library for free anymore. I can't deny how lucrative it's been for them. If Animal Crossing got my feet wet, the Wii Virtual Console was where I dove into the deep end of not just the NES, but so many retro games I'd missed out on the first time. People can dunk on the sideways Wiimote all they want, but I played so much NES on this thing that it still feels like the canonical NES controller in my mind. I just question how much I'd have been willing to do that. to pay out $5 a pop so I could dive deeper into the NES library if Animal Crossing hadn't been there to whet my appetite first. And I have to wonder what kind of an effect this lack of access is having on how younger gamers experience, or do not experience, games that came before their time. I'm getting to the age now where I see more and more people treat the games that I loved growing up with the exact same sort of, I don't get it, reaction that I once did the NES. I can tell you all about why I love Beautiful Joe, but I can't replicate for you the context I played it in, the way that I feel about it. I can't give you the love that I have for it. You've got to discover what it means to you on your own terms, but first you have to be able to. To me, as someone with copious nostalgic reverence for the industry of the 1990s, paying $50 a year to play vast swaths of the Sega Genesis, Super Nintendo, and N64 on my Switch is such a no-brainer. But if I were the age now that I was when Animal Crossing was released, not only would I not see the value in doing it, I wouldn't have the means to do it if I wanted to. Far be it from me to tell Nintendo how to run their business, but I think they might be missing a trick in putting all their classics, all of these games that laid the groundwork of this industry, behind an eternal paywall. Some people are always gonna hate new games, some people are always gonna hate old games, that's inevitable, that's fine. But even a small, rotating selection of 1 or 2 games from each console might just awaken a new understanding within some people, let alone tying them in as incentivized rewards within new releases. These are the kind of practices that might just lead someone to get interested in retro games, and get invested in supporting them, just like Animal Crossing did for me. But what about you? Do you have any stories where you didn't really get the appeal of a game from before your time, only to maybe have it click later in a different context? I also want to thank this video's sponsor, you guys. This channel is made possible by my wonderful, magical, generous Patreon backers. Join in and support my work for early access to videos, and access to what I believe is the best damn Discord community on the planet. For real, y'all kick ass. Thank you so much. And until next time, you keep geeking, I'll keep critiquing.